Hello everyone, my name is AThivierge. I'm currently in my final two courses of my MBA program at Davenport University. One thing we were asked to complete was an analysis of a company, and one company that had fascinated me over the past several years was Johnson&Johnson. The reason the company is so interesting to me is that they had a spree of product recalls over the past few years, and they had lost lawsuits, yet they still remain extremely profitable, albeit with declining U.S. sales. To get an idea of where Johnson&Johnson is and what changes, if any, need to be made, we must look at the company itself, we must identify any problems, and we must understand why the problems exist. Then we can consider if any changes should be made. To get an understanding of where a company is going, it's best to understand their past. Johnson & Johnson was founded in 1886 by three brothers, you guessed it, the Johnson brothers. The company started with the development of teaching textbooks, first aid kits, maternity kits, dental floss, and sanitary products for women, and that was just in the first 12 years. By the mid-1900s, Johnson & Johnson had expanded overseas to countries like the United Kingdom, Mexico, South Africa, Australia, and several countries in South America. Now, 1959 is a key year because that's when Johnson & Johnson began buying other companies to gain entry into new markets, something they continue to do to this day. Now, jump ahead about 50 years. At the end of quarter one of 2010, Johnson & Johnson had seen their highest net income in company history. And then things got bad. In 2010, the Food and Drug Administration recalled 14 different Johnson & Johnson products, including Visine, Pediacare, Pepcid, Tylenol, and Rolaids. The majority of the recalls fell under the McNeil brand within Johnson & Johnson. A year later, in 2011, two more recalls took effect. This leads us into the problem that any business will inevitably encounter at some point: declining profits. It wasn't a small decline either. Net income at the end of quarter 3 of 2012 was down 36% from quarter 1 of 2010, which was prior to all the recalls. When you get this information, you might be inclined to believe that consumers began to not trust Johnson & Johnson, which led to declining sales. That's not the case, though. A recent study showed that Johnson & Johnson was actually the third most trusted brand among millennials, while another study showed that Band-Aids, one of Johnson & Johnson's best performing brands, was ranked number 1 and number 2 most trusted brands for men and women respectively. So what's the problem? The problem was their spending, specifically related to the issues that they'd had. Between government requirements and self-imposed changes, Johnson & Johnson's research expenditures went up $700 million from 2010 to 2011. With that came an increase of $1.5 billion in SG&A expenses through that same time period. So how did the issues arise? In terms of the spending issues, a large part of the issue relates to the company structure. The company tried to diversify by buying other companies in one of their three business segments, which are consumer healthcare, medical devices, pharmaceuticals. The problem is, Johnson & Johnson let almost all the companies that they purchased act on their own autonomously. Because all of the companies Johnson & Johnson purchased fell under one of their three business segments, they should have been able to gain benefits, especially in the form of cost savings, through buyer power or at the very least, research and development. Instead, allowing each company to act on its own meant Johnson & Johnson as a whole would not see any of those benefits. Now, these issues seem to be in the past, so the expenses may very well be beneficial if there were no more recalls or bad press. Except there were. In January of this year, 2016, Johnson & Johnson was found guilty of a misjudgment about a failure to warn that children's motion could cause skin conditions, and just 2 months after that, their baby powder was linked to cause ovarian cancer in women. The combined cases will cost Johnson & Johnson over $210 million, and that's just in settlement. The issues of the past few years, combined with the current issues for Johnson & Johnson, could mean declining sales. Granted, last time they had recalls, there wasn't a huge backlash. With a more prevalent era of social media where everyone has a voice, however, these issues could hurt the company far more this time around. So what could Johnson & Johnson do? First of all, Johnson & Johnson can move their McNeil brand back into pharmaceuticals, where it was prior to being moved into consumer products. The pharmaceuticals division is much more regulated than the consumer products division, which will hopefully result in fewer product issues, thus helping the overall consumer opinion. Another option would be to begin to centralize the company. The decentralized approach emphasized the company's entrepreneurial spirit. However, it has led to a lack of communication among brands and has contributed to very high overhead costs. A third option would be to completely leave the consumer segment. This segment has seen profits decline, it has the lowest profit of any of the three business segments, and it may tarnish the company name, thus hurting the two more profitable segments. While each option does have some validity to it, one option stands out as the best. Centralizing the company on paper sounds great. Benefits from shared resources will show up under saved costs and could give the shareholders confidence that the days of the recalls are behind them. What won't show up are the disadvantages from centralizing the company. Johnson & Johnson has always promoted an autonomous work environment, which has led to some of Johnson & Johnson's best work. Making this change might look good for the first year or two on the income statement, but could have devastating effects long term. The option to leave the consumer segment makes more sense in actuality than on paper. Over the past 6 years, it seems as though this segment has done more harm than good for the company's reputation. While it's true that the declines from this segment have brought down the overall company, it's still a profitable segment and accounted for over 10% of the profitability in 2012. This option would never be approved by shareholders, especially considering the company would have to sell these brands for less than what they bought them for based on the negative press as of late. This leaves the option to move the McNeil brands to the pharmaceutical division as the option that could help Johnson & Johnson the most. Although consumers do purchase the products, the pharmaceutical division is much more regulated, which would hopefully prevent recalls in the future. The expense to convert wouldn't be all that great, and it gives some consumers, many of whom now are skeptical of Johnson & Johnson, a tangible change. When companies say, "We're looking into it and we'll make changes," it doesn't often sound like anything will be done. Explaining to people how the changes will be made and how the changes will make the company better is a strong start for Johnson & Johnson. In summary, Johnson & Johnson has had a long past of being a brand that people could count on. Over the past several years, however, that trust has been placed in jeopardy through product recalls and lost lawsuits. While the company is still profitable, their increased costs shouldn't happen with so many acquisitions and mergers. But with a company emphasis on diversification and autonomy, the benefits that company often sees from partnerships have not flourished at Johnson & Johnson. The company must look to make changes, to improve their image in the eyes of the consumers, and to reap the rewards of their partnerships if they want to get back to the level of success they once had. Thank you for taking time out to watch this video. I hope it's been educational. Feel free to leave me any comments below.